Hey guys, tonight we're going to look at First Corinthians chapter 9. This was written by the Apostle Paul, and he talks a lot about rights that he has as a preacher of the gospel, and he talks about the things that he gives up, even though he has a right to them. And I'd really like to explore what that says about Paul. Who is this guy that is saying these things, and really start to build this character of a person that would talk this way? What does that mean? Thinking a little bit under the surface. So, First Corinthians 9. God, please help us to understand your word and help us to get to know Paul and you in these scriptures. Am I not as free as anyone else? Am I not an apostle? Haven't I seen Jesus our Lord with my own eyes? Isn't it because of my work that you belong to the Lord? Even if others think I am not an apostle, I certainly am to you. You yourselves are proof that I am the Lord's apostle. This is my answer to those who question my authority. Don't we have the right to live in your homes and share your meals? Don't we have the right to bring a believing wife with us, as the other apostles and the Lord's brothers do, and as Peter does? Or is it only Barnabas and I who have to work to support ourselves? What soldier has to pay his own expenses? What farmer plants a vineyard and doesn't have the right to eat some of its fruit? What shepherd cares for a flock of sheep and isn't allowed to drink some of the milk? Am I expressing merely a human opinion, or does the law say the same thing? For the law of Moses says you must not muzzle an ox to keep it from uh, you must not muzzle an ox to keep it from eating as it treads out the grain. Was God thinking only about oxen when he said this? Wasn't he actually speaking to us? Yes, it was written for us, so that the one who plows and the one who threshes the grain might both expect a share of the harvest. Since we have planted spiritual seed among you, aren't we entitled to a harvest of physical food and drink? If you support others who preach to you, shouldn't we have an even greater right to be supported? But we have never used this right. We would rather put up with anything than be an obstacle to the good news about Christ. We would rather put up with anything than be an obstacle to the good news about Christ. Don't you realize that those who work in the temple get their meals from their offerings brought to the temple, and those who serve at the altar get a share of the sacrificial offerings? In the same way, the Lord ordered that those who preach the good news should be supported by those who benefit from it. Yet, I have never used any of these rights, and I am not writing this to suggest that I want to start now. In fact, I would rather die than lose my right to boast about preaching without charge. Yet, preaching the good news is not something I can boast about. I am compelled by God to do it. How terrible for me if I didn't preach the good news. If I were doing this on my own initiative, I would deserve payment, but I have no choice, for God has given me this sacred trust. What then is my pay? It is the opportunity to preach the good news without charging anyone. That's why I never demand my rights when I preach the good news. Even though I am a free man with no master, I have become a slave to all people to bring many to Christ. When I was with the Jews, I lived like a Jew to bring the Jews to Christ. When I was with those who followed the Jewish law, I too lived under that law, even though I am not subject to that law. I did this so that I could bring to Christ those who are under the law. When I'm with the Gentiles who do not follow the Jewish law, I too live apart from that law so I can bring them to Christ. But I do not ignore the law of God. I obey the law of Christ. When I am with those who are weak, I share their weakness, for I want to bring the weak to Christ. Yes, I try to find common ground with everyone, doing everything I can to save some. I do everything to spread the good news and share in its blessings. Don't you realize that in a race, everyone runs, but only one person gets the prize? So run to win. All athletes are disciplined in their training. They do it to win a prize that will fade away, but we do it for an eternal prize. So I run with purpose in every step. I am not just shadow boxing. I discipline my body like an athlete, training it to do what it should. Otherwise, I fear that after preaching to others, I myself might be disqualified. So, the beginning of this chapter, it's it seems like Paul's giving a case for why it's right to pay pastors and people that serve the people with the good news of Jesus. Why that's legitimate, okay, and ordered by God. And then he takes this turn and says, yeah, that's my right, but I'm going to give up that right because I don't want anything to get in the way of people knowing Jesus Christ. I want to put up with anything. So put up with anything and pay, if we bring that into the modern kind of thought process, put up with anything would be, in Paul's, he was a tent maker, so he had a side job. He wanted to only offer things to people instead of ask people for something or get something from them. He only wanted to give to them. And that, when you think about that, what does that say about Paul? It makes me think of this passage in Matthew 13:44. And I'm just going to read it from another page. It says, "The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure that a man discovered hidden in a field. In his excitement, he hid it again and sold everything he owned to get enough money to buy the field." The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure that a man discovered hidden in a field. In his excitement, he hid it again and sold everything he owned to get enough money to buy the field. Paul is a man that has discovered this treasure that the kingdom of heaven is described like. And the measure of which he's found in this treasure are like what it's so significant that he says things like, I will put up with anything rather than be an obstacle to those receiving Jesus. He says, I would rather die than lose the right to uh, be able to boast about not taking pay to preach the gospel. And then in First Corinthians 11, he says, in verse 1, he says, "And you should imitate me just as I imitate Christ." We've skipped a couple of chapters, but I think that intent follows with Paul. And so the question becomes, who is this man that talks this way? Who is this man? And what has happened to him? This man who was a Jewish teacher, who his name was originally Saul, and he set out to destroy the movement that Jesus started because he was so zealous for Judaism and he thought that this new way of Jesus was this threat. Something happened to him and he then became Paul, and he talks this way. Like, he doesn't want your money. He only wants you to hear the good news and for your life to be transformed and for you to find the treasure that he has found. It's a different type of man and a different type of treasure who talks this way. You cannot give this man anything. He only wants to give to you. He's found contentment, satisfaction, and everything he needs in this treasure. As we get to know Paul, he's a man that is unfamiliar to us, or at least most of us. But as we will come to find out, as God enters a human being and as God transforms that human being, the same God that makes Paul talk the way he does will begin to work in us, and we will see ourselves beginning to value that treasure like Paul does.